I think we are live. This is a quick test just to see if the stream is live, and then we will get going. Yep, I'm just going to tweet out the link here. So we are live. 1 minute while I tweet out the link for everybody. And if you can hear me right now, just let me know and tell me if I'm too loud or not loud enough. So just sending this tweet out. And we'll get started in just a minute. All right. So we are live, and this is the February 26, 2017 edition of On the Daily DFS's RotoViz Live, a RotoViz radio production. I'm going to be talking Daytona 500. I'm going to be answering all of your questions using the hashtag RVLive. So if somebody just tweet at me real quick and tell me if the volume's too loud on my microphone or not loud enough, that would be great because that way I can make sure I'm at the right volume for you guys to give you the best. So again, this is the Daytona 500 NASCAR DFS show. I'm going to answer all your questions. Use the hashtag RVLive. And I will answer all of your questions. I'm going to try to get everything. It looks like my volume is good, so that is great. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody you can get a listeners only 30% discount to a full season NASCAR pass using the rotoviz.com/NASCAR podcast page. Get that. It'll be good for the whole season. You'll have access to all of my apps, my articles, all of my content. We're going to continue to make some improvements to the DFS Optimizer app. We're going to continue to roll out a couple new apps. And then, so we'll have another machine learning type app that lets us do similarity score projections for the different drivers. I've been tweaking that around, and we'll get that set up in the next week or two as well. So pretty excited, but I'm going to dive right into some of your questions. Of course, I wanted to get the Bud Light in there. That's always important to get not the Bud Light, the Bud Heavy. It's NASCAR race day. I've got my Jeff Gordon hat on. I've got my Landon Castle t-shirt on. That's my boy right there. He appeared on our podcast last year. Really great guy. So I'll be rooting for him to win. That would be actually pretty good for my DFS lineups, considering I'm probably going to be overweight on Landon Castle. So there's a tip for you guys right there. And, I'm going to dive right into the questions. I got the Budweiser burps or whatever. So first question, this is something that's been going around the last day or two. Can you address confusion around DraftKings scoring versus for the starting versus qualifying position and place differentials? So there was a whole big deal. It was kind of dumb. Some people, the people who aren't dumb, asking this is a very good question to ask, is somebody like Martin Truex Jr., who ended their dual race up towards the front of the field, but then failed inspection and is starting 35th. People were wondering if that means Martin Truex Jr. will be 35th for DraftKings scoring purposes because that's important for place differential. Well, DraftKings responded and said it would be with his qualifying race thing, and they did the same thing last year and they fucked it up, and they just I don't know who's answering the emails on their support system, but this is the second year in a row they've screwed it up. Then they clarified. And this was all yesterday. And then I wake up this morning and apparently more emails were going out saying that Truex was going to be starting further forward according to DraftKings scoring. But I know that's not the case. 100% positive. Truex is starting from 35th. 100% positive. AJ Allmendinger is starting from 38th. Chris Buescher starting from 37th. So all of those things are as the official NASCAR starting position. Now, there is a situation where Jimmy Johnson is his NASCAR official starting position is 24th. After the qualifying race, this is important because this is after the qualifying race, they decided to go to a backup car. And once that happens, you get relegated to the back of the field, but you still maintain your original qualifying position for record-keeping purposes. So Jimmy Johnson is 24th starting position for DraftKings purposes, but for DFS purpose, but for real life purposes, he's going to the back of the field. You have to come from 40th to the front. However, again, for DraftKings scoring, he's starting from 24th. The difference is Jimmy Johnson went to the backup car after the duels. They decided after the duels they couldn't use that car, whereas Truex and Buescher and Allmendinger failed inspection during the duels, and so that means their duel finish got disqualified. So their actual qualifying in the duel got disqualified, meaning their qualify spot is near the back. So that is the confusion that everybody is having between what is the difference between Johnson's situation and what is the difference between Buescher and Allmendinger and so forth, Martin Truex Jr.'s situation. So definitely wanted to start with that because I know it had been confusing a lot of people. DraftKings will get it right, I promise you, even if they're being a little crazy, or we will hold them to it. The same thing happened last year. But their default scoring is going to, it's based off the NASCAR loop data, and NASCAR's loop data will have these guys in their correct qualifying positions. So Truex 35th, for example. So we just wanted to put that to rest. Hashtag RV Live. How do you determine the percent that you're going to use for the 500? So I think this means ownership percentages for each driver. For me, I like to obviously use my projections, and then from there I determine, what is going from the projections, what is the probability that a driver will finish in the top 6 or the top 10 in terms of DraftKings points, because that gives you a chance in being the winning lineup. So how do I determine that? Well, I could make a model to do that. So sometimes I do that on my own. Other times I just use all of my knowledge. So a lot of times it's really just based off projections. Some of it's game theory. So if I feel a driver is going to be under-owned, maybe as I started off the show with Landon Castle, might only be 10 or 15% owned. We're about to have a guest appearance here. This is everybody meet RotoDog. So RotoDog is just got back from his walk, and he's pretty excited. But so Landon Castle might be, for example, 10, 15% owned, 20% owned. I'm going to be overweight on him because I like him. I like his upside relative to what I think the field will have of him. So that's how I determine percentages sometimes, in addition just to how much I actually like the driver himself. If I like him more than other people, I'll go a little heavier on him. If I like him less than other people, I'll go lighter on him because I want to try to get leverage on the field. That's how you win a GPP. Hashtag RV Live. Should we go overboard on the other Elliott? So the other Elliott, of course, is not Chase Elliott, but that would be Elliott Sadler starting all the way in the back. So Elliott Sadler starting dead last. Yes, you should go overweight on him. I think he will he'll certainly be decently owned, I think, in the higher stakes tournaments. If you're playing, anything above $20 stakes, I think in the $20 and then the $3 mega tournaments, he could go under owned just because we have a lot of casual people playing. So I certainly would like to be overweight on Elliott Sadler in definitely the big contest. I think that's a smart move right there. Elliott Sadler, a great plate racer, and when you're a really good plate racer and in a car that isn't terrible, Regan Smith, he's racing the car Regan Smith ran in last year, and Regan Smith ended up in the winning DraftKings lineup for the Daytona 500. So definitely you're going to want to play a lot of Elliott Sadler this week. Continuing with the hashtag RV Live. Hashtag RV Live. Who are the best low-owned GPP plays starting 25th and back? That is a really good question because we want to take advantage of ownership percentages. And as I mentioned all week, we want to take advantage of place differential. And the way you take advantage of place differential is by picking drivers starting in the back. Then they get to move up forward, especially at Daytona, where it's a restrictor plate race. The field is bunched together. Anybody can pass anybody at any time, almost. And so place differential is king. So starting 25th and back, who are going to be the low-owned plays? Well, certainly Joey Gaze will be low-owned. Corey LaJoie will be low-owned. Jeffrey Earnhardt will be low owned. I don't like him as much maybe as Gaze or LaJoy, because Joey Gaze and LaJoy are in the BK racing car, and we know they can hang with the lead pack, hang in the draft. So DJ Kennington will be low owned. I think he looked a little racy, but he's maybe just starting a smidge too far forward for my liking at 28th. But those will definitely be the low-owned guys. If you go 10% on them, you'll probably be overweight to the field. 10, 15% on them, you'll be overweight to the field if you're multi-entering. That is a really good way to get some leverage, because I guarantee you, almost guarantee you, maybe not guarantee, but I almost guarantee you that probably one of somebody like Landon Castle, Joey Gaze, Corey LaJoy will probably be in the winning lineup. Probably one of these drivers will be. Now, that's not a 100% guarantee, but I'd say 80% confidence that maybe one of those three, plus maybe Brendan Gaughan all the way in the back, Elliott Sadler we talked about. I mean, once you start naming those 4 or 5 drivers, you're definitely getting one that's going to be in the winning lineup. So Brendan Gaughan starting in 39th, I think, is another one that's going to be low owned that I want to be overweight on compared to the field. All right, continuing through, looking for some hashtag RV Live questions here. Hashtag RV Live, is Jimmy Johnson a good fade? I don't necessarily think he's a good fade. I think people will be gun shy on him because he wrecked out of both of his races so far this week. He spun in his Clash race twice, and then he wrecked out in his qualifying race, and he's been a little bit low owned in both of those races compared to what I thought he would be. So I think he's going to be pretty under owned. Starting back in 24th, we know he has the upside to win this race. He did run out front, or run up front at times during his qualifying race, so they made their car a lot better. I think Jimmy Johnson is a pretty good play to be equal weight or overweight to the field on, just because I think he'll be low enough owned relative to the probability he could end up in the winning lineup. Hashtag RV Live. Thoughts on this song for Jimmy Johnson? For those of you who don't know, I did an article on my Daytona 500 strategy, and I had a lot of different songs that kind of describe my thought process. So for Elliott Sadler and Brendan Gaughan, they're back in the fold after years away from NASCAR's top series. They're much older, so I use the song, I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was, and that's all you're ever going to get from me for singing ever again. But so started from the bottom. Is that a good song for JJ? Well, yes and no. He is starting from 40th, but not for DraftKings purposes, so I don't think that quite applies to Jimmy Johnson for DraftKings purposes. He's not starting from the bottom. Hashtag RV Live. Does your package on RotoViz have projected ownership percentages? Not right now, it doesn't. No, but that's something we're thinking about adding. I do have a model I've been trying to create that looks at ownership percentages, and it certainly has found some predictive elements of ownership, obviously projections, but other things too, like salaries, Vegas odds, who's touting certain drivers actually increases their ownership, or saying don't play this driver decreases their ownership. So all of those things come into play. I'm getting close to getting a little short on the hashtag RV Live questions, so make sure you keep those coming. Hashtag RV Live. Can you talk about or compare car strengths between the Gaughan, Dinger, Buescher, Menard cars? That's a really good question. So Brendan Gaughan is in Beard Racing, and Beard Racing is a relatively new team to the NASCAR scene. They tried their hand at Cup before a few years ago and then didn't do it anymore. Now they're trying it again. They bought a car from Levine Family Racing. Levine Family Racing is the team that Michael McDowell runs, is a part of, and they have a decent car for restrictor plate races. Now this is a year-old version of that, so it'll certainly probably be less than Michael McDowell's current version. But it's a car that can hang with the lead draft, and I think if he just avoids some carnage, he could make a pass or two and avoid a wreck or two and possibly be in the winning lineup. So like I said, I don't mind being overweight on Brendan Gaughan. AJ Allmendinger and Chris Buescher, they're teammates in the JTG Doherty Racing. They are Chevys, and they're just fine. They're not the best car in the field, but they're a mid-tier type team, maybe in the back part of the mid-tier in terms of the team quality. But they've got two great drivers, AJ Allmendinger and Chris Buescher, who have their own separate strengths. They'll be no problem to hang with the draft, to make some passes. I know people were worried about Buescher in his different races earlier in the week, the duel, the clash, etc. But he's been fine. He's just kind of hung out around the back, so. AJ Allmendinger is not the best plate racer, but starting in 38th, you definitely have to have a lot of exposure to him. I don't mind using him in cash games for sure. I neglected to write him in my picks article, and that was just a complete oversight on my part. I certainly like AJ Allmendinger for cash games. Paul Menard, he's in the Richard Childress Racing car. That is a upper mid-tier team, and he will be just fine. Paul Menard is a good plate racer, so he's not a great plate racer, but he's a good one. He hangs out in the main draft, tends to avoid wrecks, and can pull off some decent finishes here and there. Looks like my plea for some hashtag RV Live questions worked out. We're going through those right now. I'll keep going as long as the hashtag RV Live questions keep coming. That could mean we do an hour-long show. We're 15 minutes into it right now. I could go an hour and a half, but I wanted to at least end it a little bit early to give people a chance to set their lineups. So, hashtag RV Live. Is Ryan Blaney going to be high-owned or less-owned because he's not a big name? I think he'll be decently high-owned, maybe 45%, but I think that's going to be less than the probability that he has of being in the winning lineup. So I think I want to be overweight on him. 55% is fine. Get that little bit of leverage on Ryan Blaney. There's a chance he goes 40, 35% because a lot of the big names are in this race, of course, and the ownership does tend to get spread out a little bit more because guys like Brendan Gunn and Elliott Sadler and Landon Castle are all playable. So I certainly think Blaney could be tops 45%. That means I'm going to go overweight on him. I think he's about 55% to be in the winning lineup. If he doesn't wreck out, he almost certainly will be in the winning lineup. And so 50%, 55% sounds about right. Let's say he has a 35% chance of wrecking out. That means 65% and maybe 80% of the time of that 65%, he finishes in the winning lineup. So 55, 50% sounds like a reasonable ownership percentage for Blaney. That's like a GTO ownership percentage. If you think he's going to be under that owned, then you can get a little extra leverage and go 60% on him. But that's certainly the higher risk play. But that's why it's exploitative and not GTO game theory optimal. Hashtag RV Live. Jones or Sadler for GPP. So this is Eric Jones or Elliott Sadler. Both of them are fine plays. I tend to like Elliott Sadler a little bit more just because he's starting a few spots further back, and I actually think he's a better plate driver than Eric Jones is. Eric Jones is one of the up-and-coming talents of NASCAR, a young guy, but he, for whatever reason, hasn't been that great in his plate tracks in the Xfinity series. So I like Elliott Sadler better. I think in terms of ownership percentages, they'll probably be pretty comparable. So both are fine plays for GPP. But I kind of just like Elliott Sadler, maybe a hair more. But you're really, again, splitting hairs between those two. I think mainly the starting differential, Sadler starts 40th and Jones starts 34th, will be the thing that I look for there. Hashtag RV Live. I appreciate your work. When an overlay presents itself in NASCAR DFS, is it well advised to reload and go all in? I like firing away at overlays. Yes, I think if you have an advantage, if you feel like you're a good player and you use sound strategy, overlay will always be to your advantage. So I would keep firing away if you think you have good sound strategy. If you're a rec player and you aren't that confident in your lineups, don't just make lineups to make lineups. That is negative EV. Put your best lineup in. And then if you want to make a few more lineups, really put your best foot forward and make sure you use good strategy. Find expert advice, whether it's mine, whether it's Stevie TPFL's over at Roto Grinders, whether it's any of the other NASCAR touts in the industry, and really use proper roster construction. Then, yes, overlay will definitely be worth continuing to fire at. Let's take a quick sip of some Budweiser. By the way, I hope you all enjoyed that guest appearance from RotoDog. He's a funny guy. So he and the wife are now outside in the backyard doing some exercises and having fun. So maybe RotoDog will make another appearance in a little while. But let's get back to the strategy, the questions. We have a lot of hashtag RV Live questions coming in. This is great. So hashtag RV Live. How long do you expect to do this show today? Oh, I already answered that. I didn't realize I was going to get to this, but I will be doing this at least until the top of the hour, which would be 1 o'clock Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific. I'm really not that good at math. Just kidding. So 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. I could go even half an hour longer if we have a lot of questions coming in. So it all depends on that. Hashtag RV Live. Quick thoughts on Casey Kane. I think he's a fine tournament play. I think he's even usable in cash games. I I know people will be on him in cash games, that's for sure. I won't be. That's not because I don't think he's a good cash game play. I just prefer to go a different route with my roster construction for cash games. For GPP, certainly a fine play. I like using him around 35-40%. I think he's going to be extremely low owned. He's been low owned in his in his qualifying race, and that being low owned in his qualifying race, I think will translate itself to here when there's even more drivers available to choose from. So I certainly think Kasey Kahne is a fine GPP play. I have 3 between 20 and 30. So Kyle Busch, Jimmy Johnson, and Kasey Kahne, and 3 from 30 to 40 in cash. Thoughts? I think that might be a little too aggressive for cash. Certainly with Kyle, Jimmy Johnson, and Kasey Kahne, you have 3 drivers that can come forward very easily in great equipment. I prefer going a little bit different roster construction with my cash games. I don't think you need to play all 3 of those guys in the 20s and 30s. I would rather play 4 guys at least starting in the 30s, but that's my personal preference. I know some people will probably be on the same roster construction as at cash for you, and that's totally fine if that's what you feel comfortable with. Just the thing is, if one of these guys gets in a crash, whether it's Jimmy or Kyle or whoever, you're going to be hurting a lot more than if somebody like, I should throw a name out, AJ Allmendinger or Ryan Blaney or Paul Menard or Eric Jones or Chris Buescher back in the 30s gets in a crash, and it's going to hurt you a lot less. The other thing that's nice is Jimmy, Kyle, and Kahne will probably be higher owned in cash than somebody like a Chris Buescher or a maybe an AJ Allmendinger even. So in that case, if one of those guys crashes out, Kyle or Jimmy and Kahne, and you're off of them, maybe not Kahne, but maybe like Kyle or Jimmy, if one of those guys crashes out and you're off of them, you suddenly pass a lot of people because you didn't have them. So I think I don't tend to look at ownership percentages for cash games, but I think in some situations it can be totally fine. A lot of hashtag RV Live questions coming in. This is awesome. I've got about 20 at least in the queue right here. Knowing the sharp plays, how much do you find yourself playing less optimal plays based purely on game theory? I think this is a really great question. I tend to do that. So sometimes I will do a lineup with Landon Castle and Corey LaJoie just because I know not many people will be on that. And it's certainly possible if there are wrecks, then they can be in the winning lineup. Or I might do something like, a Brendan Gaughan and a Ricky Stenhouse lineup or something like that where I think people will be less on that. So I don't do it a ton. I certainly don't want to go extremely overweight on these drivers, and I also don't want to go extremely overweight on these rare combinations, but I do want to be a little bit overweight on these rare drivers and a little bit overweight on these rare combinations, because if they hit, that definitely gives you a leverage. But, the sharp plays are the sharp plays for a reason, and that's why I continue to hammer all the guys starting in the back of the field, because those are the sharp plays. Guys like Martin Truex Jr. probably will be the highest owned play on the board. I think I did want to mention Matt Kenseth. I think Matt Kenseth could be pretty low owned for being a driver that has a chance to win this race. He was leading the Daytona 500 going into the last lap last year before he got passed by his teammate Denny Hamlin. He's a 2-time Daytona 500 winner. I think of the drivers starting kind of in the front: Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, Denny Hamlin, Dale Earnhardt Jr., etc. I think Matt Kenseth is probably being overlooked a little bit. So I kind of like, if I do my lineups where I pick one driver starting from the front, I kind of like going a little more on Matt Kenseth than I think other people will be going. So that's just a total game theory play. That is certainly a risky play because the other guys I mentioned are the more likely ones to win by Vegas odds. I just think it's closer than we all think it is between a guy like Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, and then Matt Kenseth. So I think Kenseth will be a good, leverage type play off of if you're doing your lineups with one early guy, avoiding all those other guys I named and using Kenseth. Hashtag RV Live, leaning towards 4 30-plus starting positions in cash or 5. I'm leaning towards 5 in my cash game lineups. I've actually made 5 cash game lineups. I think that's what I'm going to be going with. Normally I go with 1, but I think in the nature of Daytona, 5 is what I'm going to do this week, and I'm hoping to hit on 3 of them. That'll make me a little bit of profit or maybe even a lot of profit depending on how high some of those place in head-to-heads. And so I'm definitely leaning towards 5 in the 30s or worse. I think I have 1 cash game lineup or maybe 2 with 6 30 or worse. but I'm not using any with 4 that are 30th or worse. So my preferred roster construction is 5 and 1 or 6 and 0 for cash. Now, I know other people disagree with me. That is totally fine. Do what makes you feel the most comfortable with your cash game lineup. Certainly, there are drivers that are cash game rosterable in those 20s to 30s range. Hashtag RV Live. Who is my favorite driver? This is not a DFS question, but I love answering this question because it's kind of a good story. So I've always been a Jeff Gordon fan. I grew up a Jeff Gordon fan. Huge 24 fan. I think that's why you can see on my hat there. Love Jeff Gordon. He's just, awesome driver. When I won my qualifier to the DraftKings NASCAR main event, we went down to Homestead, Miami for the finale, and I got a Jeff Gordon autographed hat there, so that was really cool. This is not it. This is a non-autographed hat. I'm not stupid enough to wear autographed hats. But Jeff Gordon retired now, and I didn't fill him in with Chase Elliott. I don't really have necessarily a favorite driver anymore these days. I like a lot of drivers like Denny Hamlin. Obviously, he is a Virginia boy. I'm originally from Virginia, and he won me a lot of money in multiple years of NASCAR DFS, so I have a soft spot there for Denny Hamlin. We always talk about the Hamlin hat. I have it right here. I'm not wearing it because I have a lot of gross stains on it, but my wife is like, what the hell? So, but I love Denny Hamlin, and I have the Hamlin hat here for good luck, but I'm not wearing it right now. I love Landon Castle, of course. Landon Castle came on our podcast. Really nice guy, and just really funny. Like the funniest NASCAR driver I think there might actually be on Twitter, period. Right up there with Dale Earnhardt Jr. Like Dale Earnhardt Jr. a lot as well. So just, a lot of good guys. Jamie McMurray, Kyle Larson. Just I tend to be a Chevy fan, except Landon Castle and Denny Hamlin are the other non-Chevy drivers I tend to gravitate toward. Hashtag RV Live. Which low-owned drivers in a position between the 30s and 40s have the highest chance to be in the winning lineup? I think Elliott Sadler has probably the highest chance of the drivers that'll be low-owned starting back there, simply because he's starting dead last. He's a good plate racer, and he's in equipment that can do just fine. So Elliott Sadler will be the pick for me. How do you like Eric Jones? 40% exposure, is that good? Hashtag RV Live. I think 40% exposure is just fine. He's not the best plate racer in the world, as I mentioned, and I think you'll be overweight on him at 40%, so that's a great exposure. I'll probably be between 35 and 40% myself. Hashtag RV Live. I want to play Eric Jones, but I'm worried about his lack of experience. Is this a legit concern? Yeah, it's a concern. That's why his upside is it's there, but he also has a lot of downside. So that's why I think he'll be pretty low owned. I think those concerns that people have will depress his ownership. He's not also just one of the stud names right now. Not a Kyle Busch, not a Jimmy Johnson, not a superstar of NASCAR. Not a Keselowski, Logano, Hamlin, Dale Jr., Chase Elliott, Kevin Harvick, name, Matt Kenseth. So he'll be pretty low owned relative to those guys, especially because his salary is up there at $8,300. I like being overweight on Eric Jones. Yes, there's concern, but starting that far back in 34th position, there is a lot of upside, a lot to like about Eric Jones, even though he has a lack of experience. The other thing he has, though, is a lot of talent. So he'll figure out the draft. He's got 200 laps to do it. Avoids a few wrecks, and he'll be in good shape. There is a lot of downside to him, so I like him less in cash maybe than other people might, but I definitely like him in GPPs. Hashtag RV Live. Can Danica win this thing? I think it's not impossible. I earlier in the week I said she was probably the only driver that couldn't win the Clash, and then I saw her race in the Clash. She was pretty racy. Saw her race in the Duels. She was pretty racy. Can she win this thing? Yeah. What's the probability? I don't know, 0.5%, 1%, 2% tops. I did see her a couple years ago on her own merit pass Jimmy Johnson for the lead at the Daytona 500. There's a really good YouTube video, and she held the lead for 9 minutes. So she held off charges from Johnson and a couple other drivers. So she certainly knows how to race in the draft. She's smart. She can avoid crashes, so she can do that. And put herself in position to be there the last 10 laps or 20 laps. Who knows what could happen? Can she win it? Yeah. Will she? Almost certainly not. But she can be in the winning lineup. I just think it's very unlikely because she's starting so far forward. So I'm going to have extremely low to 0% exposure on Danica. I think that is just kind of the play there because she's almost going to need to win it to be in the winning lineup for me. Hashtag RV Live. Jimmy Johnson or Blaney in cash. Can leave money on the table, but worried about Jimmy being loose and starting in the back. I prefer Ryan Blaney for cash games if I'm picking one of them easily. I think Blaney's a perfectly safe play, just like Jimmy is, and he's actually safer than Jimmy because there's that 11 place starting position difference. We did talk about the loose condition for Jimmy. I think that's getting corrected, but that always does have a little bit of downside there. There's always a big one that can happen, and if it does sweep up Jimmy Johnson or Ryan Blaney, obviously JJ has more downside, and JJ does have to come through the field from 40th through the field. So if there's an early wreck, that is a concern as well. But definitely, I prefer Blaney and cash Jimmy Johnson. Hashtag RV Live. Talk to me about Michael McDowell. I think Michael McDowell is a okay low-owned play. I was much more on him earlier in the week until he ended up qualifying 22nd. I wrote him up as a GPP play. I think I've since maybe soured a little on him as a GPP play, just because as I've started to make lineups and rosters, I found myself not going towards him. But he will be low-owned, so I don't mind being overweight on him. If you want to go 10%, you'll be overweight on him, I'm pretty sure. So that's kind of where I'm at with McDowell. I just don't love him as a play because he's starting a little too far forward for me. I liked him a lot earlier in the week, even after qualifying, but I since have kind of soured on him a little bit, and so it's a reaction article. I wrote it right after the duels, and that was also when McDowell was actually starting a little bit further back because Martin Truex Jr., Chris Buescher, AJ Allmendinger had all qualified ahead of him before the inspection deal. So I liked McDowell a little more when he was starting 25th or 6th or whatever it was, 28th, somewhere in there. So I didn't update the article. That's on me. But hopefully you're listening to this show. I like him a lot less now. Hashtag RV Live. Haven't heard anything on Casey Kane. Do you think he'll be low owned at mid pack? Yeah, we have talked about Kane. I think he'll be low owned. 25% owned maybe. I like 30 to 40% exposure on Casey Kane. Favorite driver GPP at 10K and under, hashtag RV Live. My favorite GPP play is probably Ryan Blaney. Penske affiliated car starting in 36th. Might go under-owned because Truex is right there in 35th. Might go under-owned because there's other drivers in his price range that people will like. Ryan Blaney is my favorite GPP play. Thoughts on Kyle Busch for GPP? Certainly a fine driver to use in GPPs. I think I'll be underweight on him because I think he's going to be 50, 60% owned, 40% owned even. I'm going to have maybe 30% of him. I think that's a fair amount to use for Kyle Busch, starting that far forward in 21st. Yes, he can end up in the winning lineup. The odds of that happening are much more reduced. So I think I'll have about 30% exposure to Kyle Busch. I think that'll be underweight. I think he's going to be about 40% owned. Getting towards the top of these questions, I'm going to take a quick sip of Budweiser. Actually, I have a question for you, and use hashtag RV Live to respond. Is there anything in my NASCAR coverage that we don't currently offer over at RotoViz that you guys would like to see? Every week I give a picks article, my machine learning model projections. I have the Splits app, the DFS Optimizer app. We're working on a Sim Scores projection app. We've got the podcast. We do the RotoViz live show, which those are free, of course, but we go much more into depth, and a lot of the articles in the apps are worth it. So what else would you like to see in the RotoViz NASCAR package? That's what you guys are paying for. I'm going to try to make it as good for you guys as possible. So hit me up on hashtag RV Live, and that way I can read a few of those responses. Hashtag RV Live, my hero. I know I am everybody's hero. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just excited for the Daytona 500, and I know you guys are too. Hashtag RV Live. I literally have 8 drivers I wrote down to play. Is that bad to put all of your eggs in those few baskets? I think with Daytona, it's worse than maybe in another race because the odds of crashing at Daytona are certainly much higher. And so the odds that of your 8 drivers, 3 of them crash are pretty decent. On average, about 33 to 35% of the field has a finish that's not on the first or second lead lap. So that means, that's about 3 out of every 8 drivers, and you have 8 there. So 3 of them are expected to crash. That only leaves you with 5 on average that won't crash, and you have a roster of 6. So I think it's pretty tough to put all your eggs in just 8 drivers at Daytona. Other races may not be as bad, but I think at Daytona, it's something I'd probably want to spread my exposure out a little more. But hey, if they survive, you'll be in really, really, really good shape. So it just depends on your risk tolerance. Do we need a lap leader, or is all of it going to be place differential okay? Hashtag RV Live. It's certainly possible to have place differential in all of your spots and be in the winning lineup. I do think it will probably take the winner, but the winner won't necessarily be a mega lap leader. It could be, somebody like Joey Logano who has to race his way through the field, gets out front for the last 15 laps. That's not really a lap leader. That's less than, if he leads 16 laps, that's 4 points for laps led. So I don't count that as a lap leader. I don't think we're going to see somebody lead more than 50, 60 laps. That could happen, but even then with the segments and things like that, we'll probably see some shuffling. We'll have some cautions. I don't think we'll see anybody lead more than 60 laps, and that's only 15 points for laps led because it's a quarter point. So yeah, 15 points is okay, but that's negated by coming through 8 place differential, because you gain 8 points for place differential and eight extra finishing position points as well. So that's 16 compared to those 15 lap led points. It's all about the place differential. You can have a lap leader in there. I would only pick one in your lineup. I'm only picking one driver starting before 20th position in my lineups if I'm doing the route where I go a driver starting in the top 20. Otherwise, I'm picking everybody outside the top 20, and I'm definitely doing lineups with 6 drivers outside the top 20. Hashtag RV Live. Do we need a... that was the one I just read. I'm drinking too much. No, I'm just kidding. Hashtag RV Live. AJ Allmendinger or Brendan Gaughan. Allmendinger will be the chalkier play. Gaughan will be the more contrarian play. Allmendinger has the higher upside tail of his distribution. So I think relative to their ownership percentages, I probably like Allmendinger, but both are fine plays. I think Allmendinger's upside tail being fatter than Gaughan's is more than make up for the ownership percentage difference, because I don't think Allmendinger is going to be like 60% owned or anything. So I certainly like Allmendinger relative to Gaughan. All right, I need to refresh the hashtag RV Live here. 1 second, scrolling through. Oh, here we go. Hashtag RV Live. Are you going with your boy Denny Hamlin to repeat? Who's your pick to win the race? My pick to win the race is Brad Keselowski. I think he's been really strong this week, both in his dual race, his clash race. The Penske guys have won the last 3 NASCAR points-paying restrictor plate races. So full field points-paying restrictor plate races, if you don't count the duels, obviously, since they paid points this year. But that means 2 for Logano and 1 for Keselowski over the last 3 races. I think it's Keselowski's turn. He's been a little bit stronger than Logano this week. Yes, Logano won the clash, but it's only because Keselowski and Hamlin wrecked going for the lead. Hashtag RV Live. Do you think a lineup with only guys starting 30th or worse could make it all the way to the top? Do I think it could happen? Yes, absolutely. I don't think it will, because odds are some of these guys will be running mid-pack or in the back and get caught up in one of these wrecks. So I will have lineups with all 6 drivers 30th or worse. I definitely will. It's just not going to be a massive percentage of my portfolio. I will have drivers starting in the 20s in most of my lineups, and obviously I'll have some lineups with one single driver starting inside the top 20 as well. Hashtag RV Live. Dr. Bud. Let's cheers to that. Dr. Bud. Scoring question. Does Jimmy Johnson have to get from 40 to 23 before pointing? No. So obviously you get points for finishing position as well. So if he's in 40th, that means obviously with his qualifying position at 24th, that's negative 16 place differential points. And he would get 1 point for being in 40th, so that's negative 15 points. So as soon as he makes up 8 spots, so as he gets to 32nd, that'll put him in positive point territory. And then once he gets to, from 32nd to 24th, that means he's neutral, but that's 20 points for finishing position. So he's at 20 points even if he gets back to his starting position, and from there he can move up. Hashtag RV Live. Can you find head-to-heads on... Can't find you in head-to-heads on DraftKings. My DraftKings name is Giffenbone on DraftKings. It's Giffenbone. Giffenbone. My last name is Giffen, so like Griffin but no R. So it's Giffenbone. I used to play trombone, so that's where the bone came from. Can't find you in head-to-heads on DraftKings. It's because I'm not RotoDoc on DraftKings. I'm Giffenbone, and I entered head-to-heads all the way from $1 up to $20 in every price level. And I'm posted, so I think you should be able to find me in those head-to-head forums. Hashtag RV Live. Best roster construction for GPPs. We've talked about this a lot, but anywhere from 5 or 4, 5, or 6 starting 30th or worse. 1 or 2 starting in the 20s to 30s, occasionally 3 if it's in the back half of the 20s, and no more than 1 driver starting inside the top 20. Check out my strategy article for more on that. Blaney in a backup car, question mark, hashtag RB Live. Yeah, he's in a backup car, so he'll move to the backup of the field, but that means he's only moving from 36th to 40th. His DraftKings scoring position will still be 36th, so not a concern for me at all whatsoever. I don't even care about that. Blaney will be just fine. Hashtag RB Live, any shot AJ Allmendinger finishes in the top 10? Yes, there's a chance he finishes in the top 10. I'd give it maybe a 10% chance. I still think if AJ Allmendinger finishes top 18 or 15, he could be in the winning lineup coming from 38th. And that's why his probability of being in the winning lineup is greatly increased, because I think he just needs to get into that top 18. That'd be 20 place differential points. And then 44 minus 18 is 26. So 26 plus 20, 46 points. Yeah, I guess he'd need a little bit more than the top 18. Maybe a top 12 for Dinger, and he's in the winning lineup. Did I do that math correctly? I feel like I didn't. 44 minus 18. Yeah, that's 26 plus 20. So yeah, he'd definitely have to get higher than 18th. But if he finishes in the top 12, he'll be in the winning lineup, because that's another 12 points. That puts him at 58. That would probably get it done. And he'll get a few fastest laps along the way, which would get him around 60. Hashtag RV Live. How much salary is too much to leave on the table? I think $11,000 on the table is probably about where I would go. I do have a lineup that I think is 39,100 or 39,700 or something like that. So I have a lineup or two that has left more than $10,000 on the table. That's fine. The winning lineup before has been $39,100. There was a year, I think it was even less than that, on Talladega, which is even more random, that had like J.J. Yaley, Josh Wise, Cole Witt, and somebody else. Like the winning lineup was like 37,000. So yeah, you can at plate tracks. Daytona's a little more predictable than Talladega, so I think 39 would be a floor for me. But most of my lineups are higher than that, obviously. But I really don't worry about salary too much. Hashtag RB Live. My buddy says I'm crazy for fading Junior. Am I? GPP only. No, I'm fading Junior. I think I've made 4 lineups out of 150 with him. The only reason I'm not doing the 100% fade is because my wife is a Dale Jr. fan. No, actually, the only reason I'm not doing a 100% fade is just because I think I think there is a small chance he is in the winning lineup. If you look at my strategy article, the number of times a driver starting in the top 3 has been in the winning lineup at the Daytona 500 in the last 12 years. So that's 36 possibilities, 3 times 12, has been twice. So about 2 out of 36, that's about a 6-ish% chance. So I'm using my top 3 exposure on Dale Earnhardt Jr., and I'm actually going underweight to that 6%. Hashtag RV Live, Menard versus Stenhouse versus Buescher in cash. I'm definitely ruling out Stenhouse in cash. That's too far forward for a guy who doesn't have that much upside and has a lot of downside. I think between Menard and Buescher, it's pretty much splitting hairs. Menard has the higher projection, but also the higher starting position. I think you can go either way. I would flip a coin. I think I prefer Menard simply because he's less likely to DNF than Buescher. Hashtag RV Live, Buescher, Eric Jones gone for cash. Pick one. I will pick, that's a tough one. I think I'll probably pick Eric Jones. He's in the best equipment there. But I certainly can see arguments for all 3 of them. Maybe Buescher, I guess, if I were to pick another one. I'd go either Eric Jones or Buescher. That's pretty tough. That's also splitting hairs. Actually, now that I think about it, I probably would go... Yeah, I'd probably go Buescher. I think he and Eric Jones have pretty similar upside as well as same downside. Hashtag RV Live. Johnson, Jones, or Buescher for the last cash spot. I like, we just talked about this, I like Buescher. I think you can make an argument for all 3. I just give the nod to Buescher over Jones. And then between Buescher and Johnson, it depends on your preference. I, of course, prefer going drivers in the back. I know other people will prefer Johnson. I think with Johnson, you get the coming from 40th issue where he has to drive through the field. You have much more downside if there is a wreck, which can sweep up anybody. So there's that randomness involved. I like Buescher better than Johnson for cash. And we talked about splitting hairs. I like him just slightly better than Jones. Hashtag RV Live. Hey, Doc, do you like Casey Kane for GPPs? Not much talk about him. We've definitely just right here real quick. Sorry about that. Make sure I'm not too off the screen or whatever. So we have talked about Casey Kane a few times. I've mentioned I like him in GPPs. I think he's going to be about 35% owned. Or sorry, I think he's going to be about less than 35% owned. So I like 35% exposure in that neighborhood, maybe even up to 40%. Hashtag RV Live. Keep writing the strategy articles. That is definitely something I'm going to be doing now that I am a full-time fantasy person. Last year when I had my biofuels job, I wasn't able to do that as much. So going to be doing my strategy articles every week. Hashtag RV Live. They want ownership percentage projections. So these are now the what do you want from the NASCAR package. I'll try to get ownership percentage projections. It's going to take a few weeks. Obviously, I need to get some CSVs downloaded and build a model for that. So it'll be several weeks, maybe 6, 7, 8 weeks before we get those. And not sure if that's going to be valuable enough, but I think it probably will be. Hashtag RV Live. Gone Jones Busher for cash. I just talked about these. Busher. Hashtag RV Live. Ownership projections and your projected percentage for being in the winning lineup, possibly rankings. Okay, so that's a request for the package. They want ownership percentage. They want my projected percentage for being in the winning lineup. So I can't do winning lineup, obviously, because I would have to salary adjust those, and we don't have salaries going back that long. But I could do probability of being in the top 6 or in the top 10, possibly rankings. Hashtag RV Live. Do you have anybody starting top 25 in your cash game lines? No. Sorry, I take that back. In one of my 5, I have Kyle Busch. If so, who are you overweight confident with in that spot? In cash game, like I said, I'm not going overweight on anybody inside the top 25 for cash. I have 20% exposure to Kyle Busch in cash because I have him in one of my 5. Hashtag RV Live. Allmendinger or gone in a GPP. We've talked about these. I think Allmendinger has both more upside and is safer because he's less likely to retire from a mechanical problem. So he has the better range of outcomes. Gone will be far lower owned, but I still like Allmendinger better relative to the ownership percentages. So I already answered that one, but happy to answer it again for those who may have missed it. Hashtag RV Live. Hey, Rotodoc. Howdy. Do you like Kane for GPP? Oh, I already read that one. Hashtag RV Live. Jimmy Johnson starting in the back of the field now. Yes, that's always been the case, but he will be scored from 24th on DraftKings. We've known that for a few days now. Hashtag RV Live. Can you talk to me more about Kyle Busch? Good upside and chance to win. Is a guy like Menard a better play just because he's starting in the 30s? I think Menard's a better play just because he's starting back there. And, Kyle Busch would certainly have to finish in the top 5, top 3 to be in the winning DraftKings lineup because it's not that much place differential going from 21st to 13th, right? Or to 3rd, right? That's 18 place differential points. But we talked about how Allmendinger can finish 15th and get more place differential points than that. Yes, Kyle Busch would have better finishing position points as well, but he's also more expensive. Not that price matters that much. So I think, yes, Kyle Busch has a decent probability of being in the winning lineup, but I think he has almost just as much probability as Paul Menard. And obviously there's the downside of crashing out. That can happen to anybody. So, maybe a 30% chance Kyle Busch wrecks out of the race. And then there's the times where he doesn't wreck out of the race, that he's not in the winning lineup. I think that puts him above a 50% chance of not being in the winning lineup, closer to 60, 70% chance. So I like being about 30% on Kyle Busch. Hashtag RV Live. Are you worried about the 77? I see the tweets that they are having trouble. Not worried about him per se. I think they're just kind of, trouble going through inspection is trouble going through inspection. They always have that. They'll get it corrected, and they'll be out there just fine. Hashtag RV Live. Can you discuss the Truex Jr. position move and how that affects his scoring potential if you haven't already? We talked about that at the top of the show. Truex is starting from 35th for DraftKings and NASCAR purposes. 35th place. So that's where he'll be scored from as his starting position. Hashtag RV Live. I imagine you'll have Keselowski ownership today. We'll be rostering any other top 10 starters. I definitely will have Keselowski ownership. It's not going to be extremely high, about 10%, because the probability that he wins, I think, according to the Vegas odds, is 8-1. So, what is that? That's 12.5 or so percent to win. So 8-1 is not that great. I mean, I think he's about 10, 12, 15% to win, and that would be what it takes. Plus, he'd probably need to get a decent handful of laps led. So I'll have about up to 10% Keselowski. As far as other drivers starting in the top 10, I mentioned a tiny smidge, tiny smidge of Dale Jr. A little bit more of Denny Hamlin between Keselowski and Jr., and a little bit of Kevin Harvick. And then, as I talked about for a game theory play, I'd like some exposure to Matt Kenseth inside the top 10 as well. And finally, I think I have 2 lineups with Austin Dillon. So those are let's see, Dillon, Kenseth, Keselowski, Harvick, Hamlin, and Dale Jr. That's 6 drivers in the top 10 I am rostering. My total combined exposure between them is, I think, no more than 25%. Hashtag RV Live. How many players do you have in your player pool when building 150 lineups? I have almost all of them for Daytona. I wouldn't say almost all of them for Daytona. I take that back. I can go look at it right now. I'd have to pull up my Excel spreadsheet, but I'd imagine I've faded about 15 drivers in the top. I guess so. I named 6 in the top 10, and then I've got another 1, 2, 3, I think, in the 11 to 20. So that's 9, 10-ish in the top 10. So I'm definitely fading at least 9 or 10 in the top 10, and then I've got maybe 4 or 5 I'm fading completely. That's starting 20th or worse. Somebody like DJ Kennington. So I think I'm about 25 to 20 to 25 drivers for this slate. Now, in other slates, I'm probably less. I'm about 18 to 20 for most weeks. So there's occasionally times I want to get some exposure spread out depending on the randomness of the race. But so other races I'll be tighter, but this race I'm about, I think, what did I say? About 20 to 25 total drivers. More closer to 25 total drivers, I think. Hashtag RV Live. Is this a solid lineup? So I'm going to read this lineup on air. Truex, Sadler gone. Buescher, Blaney, Dinger. That's a lineup with drivers all starting in the 30s. I don't think it's going to be the winning lineup because I think the upside is probably capped. But that, if somebody like Blaney or Allmendinger or Truex wins the race, that could be the winning lineup. Yes, absolutely. So it's a good lineup. It's a cash. I like it more as a cash game than a GPP, although I don't even love it in cash games because I think Gone has some risk to him there. But it's fine for GPPs. I just tend to like being a little more contrarian with maybe somebody like a Michael Waltrip or a Landon Castle or LaJoy or Joey Gaze. Some of those types of drivers, because I think that's where the differentiation will really come. And I don't think it'll be 6 drivers starting that far back. I mean, the driver you have starting the furthest back here is looks like 35, 40, 39, 38, 37, 36. Yeah, so you basically just pick the top back 6 drivers. I wouldn't do that. Hashtag RV Live, Allmendinger, Kane, and Sadler in cash. List them in order of how you like them. Number 1 is Allmendinger. Number 2 is Sadler. Number 3 is Kane. We're at the end of the hashtag RV Live questions. Last one here that I have. So if you want the show to go on, keep firing them away. Otherwise, I'm going to take this question, talk a little theory, maybe just a few other thoughts on the Daytona 500. We'll wrap up at the top of the hour. Hashtag RV Live. Casey Kane, Kyle Busch combo, or Eric Jones, Matt Kenseth combo for GPPs. I think I prefer wow, that's a good one. I kind of like the Kane-Kyle Busch combo just because they have a better probability of finishing in the winning lineup, obviously with Kenseth starting so far forward and then Jones being pretty risky. So I'll go Kane-Kyle Busch. That's certainly going to be the chalkier play as well. I think if you went somebody like Kenseth and Blaney or something like that, I would really like that type of a lineup. I'll refresh the hashtag RV Live, see if we have anything new coming in. Otherwise, I'm going to give my final thoughts, and we'll wrap up. I'm going to drink some Budweiser. One more. Hashtag RV Live. Castle and GPP. Chance you think he wrecks. I love Landon Castle, man. That's my boy, Landon Castle. Let's look at the shirt here. Landon Castle in a GPP. Absolutely. I will be overweight on him in the $20, and I will be crazy high on him. I'm not going to say how much, but crazy high on him in the $3 massive GPP. So love Landon Castle. He's my boy, and if he wins me a big GPP, I'm going to go bananas. Hashtag RV Live, JJ or Kyle Busch in cash. I tend to prefer a different type of roster construction, but if I'm picking one, I'm going to pick Jimmy Johnson. They have similar upside. They have similar downside. So pick the one starting 3 spots further back. All right, so I am going to take a sip of Budweiser. We're going to have the last few kind of thoughts and jigs here. Real quick, I wanted to remind everyone, 30% discount, rotoviz.com/NASCAR podcast. Tweet at me at Rotodoc. Send me any questions you have. I will still be answering questions on Twitter if you have them up until lineup lock. I've already set all my lineups, so I might just tweak a couple here or there. Excuse me. And I think that's going to do it in terms of my promotions here. I got a little more content or strategy talk, like I said. So in terms of drivers in the top 20, one guy we haven't mentioned is Kyle Larson. I will have some exposure to him. I do think there's a chance he wins this race. He's a very aggressive driver. I could see him making his way forward and winning this race. He's been in contention for wins at restrictor plate races in the Xfinity Series. We've seen him run up front a couple times this week. I'll have some exposure to him. It's not going to be a ton. It's going to be less than Logano. It's going to be I think maybe I have like somebody like Matt Kenseth. I don't think anybody else inside the top 20 is people I'll be using. Certainly they can be in the winning lineups, and if they are, I'm in trouble, right? But what it would take for somebody like a Danica Patrick, a Ricky a Eric Almirola, a Newman, those types that are starting that far forward is probably a win or at best a top 3. But even then, you're probably gonna have drivers coming from 35th to 8th that pick up 8-10 fastest laps, and they'll trump Danica or whoever those people are starting in the front, whether that's Dylan or Almirola or Bain. So that's kind of how I feel about those guys in the front. Moving towards the back, we did talk a little bit about Michael McDowell. I do like Ricky Stenhouse in terms of a contrarian play, starting 23rd. I won't go crazy on him. 15-20% exposure. That's probably going to be overweight, I think, to the field. I think that's probably too high in terms of the probability that he has to win. But as a leverage play, I don't mind being in that 15% range. Going further back, we didn't talk Michael Waltrip much at all. I'm curious to his ownership percentage. I think it could be 25%, simply because he's won 2 Daytona 500s. People look at that. They know him as a name from being a talking head of NASCAR, as being a restrictor plate specialist. I have about, actually, you know what? I'm just going to pull up and talk about my Michael Waltrip exposure, because I've had a really tough, he might be the driver I've had the toughest time with here all week. So sorry, just flipping through my my files. I have for Michael Waltrip, I have 10.7% exposure. So that's not as high as I thought. So he's starting in 30th. I think you could go higher than 10.7. I actually want to be, so I might tweak a few lineups to get more of him. But I don't think you need to be 20-25% on him. He's starting 30th, which isn't like as far back as some of the others. He hasn't been like the dominant restrictor plate force that he's been, obviously not dominant, but like he's been very good in contention for wins 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Last couple of years, he definitely hasn't. It's his last Daytona 500. I expect 20+% ownership from him, maybe 20%, right around there. So I like being right around equal to maybe slightly underweight on the field to Michael Waltrip. Anybody else I haven't really talked about? 25th, Matt DiBenedetto. I have no exposure to him. He's not been that great at plate races, and I don't see that much upside for him. I see much more downside. Hanging out in the back of the pack. He could avoid a lot of wrecks and finish 16th. I don't really see a top 12, 10, 8 in it for him, which I think he'd need at least an 8th place finish to be in the winning lineup. No exposure to Matt DiBenedetto. Any other theory? I think, like I said, just kind of the theory I like is making those lineup strategies. One driver starting in the top 20. My combined exposure for drivers starting in the top 20 is... So for drivers starting in the top 10, because I talked about that, my combined exposure is... that's not updated, but it's around 20... it's around 30%, actually. Maybe 35%. And then my combined exposure for drivers starting in the top 20 is right around 60-65%. So that's total. Like I'm not even 100. I don't even have 150 lineups worth of drivers starting inside the top 20, or 150 total, I should say, rosters of drivers starting inside the top 20. More of my rosters are, I have less than 150 lineups because I only am doing one driver per lineup of drivers starting in the top 20. Less than 150 lineups of where I have one driver starting in the top 20. That was a long-winded explanation. I'm getting tired. It is the top of the hour. I'm going to have some Budweiser, and I think that's going to do it. So, this has been a RotoViz Radio on the Daily DFS production. Got a couple last hashtag RV Live questions. I'll answer those. Hashtag RV Live Castle Keselowski combination or Kane Dillon Castle Keselowski. Hashtag RV Live. What put you so heavily on Kyle Busch last week in the $27 tourney you won? I don't even remember. Was I heavy on Kyle Busch? I was going to try to fly through these, but now I have to look. My scrolling through. Yeah, Kyle Busch was in my winning lineup. I wasn't heavy on him. I was actually at 60%. The field was 70%, so I was underweight on Kyle Busch, but he was starting 13th of a 17-driver field. So, that explains it all right there. Place differential is king, and I actually was underweight on Kyle Busch in the winning or in the clash. Hashtag RV Live non-Daytona question: how do you predict Dominator points in a non-restrictor plate race? I have a model for that. Use lots of different statistics, whether it's prior Dominator performance, track performance, qualifying position, practice speeds, etc. Hashtag RV Live feedback on this lineup: Blaney, Truex, Kyle, Jimmy, Castle, Kenseth. Too many in the middle of the pack. Yeah, you got Kyle, Jimmy, Castle, and you got Kenseth far up front. So I'm not a huge fan of that lineup. I'd get one of those middle tier guys and pick a driver starting further back. Maybe a Kyle or a Jimmy because you have Castle in there. I like Castle in there. I might remove one of Kyle or Jimmy and replace it with a driver in the 30s. That's going to do it. RotoViz Radio production on the Daily DFS production. I am Nick Giffen. You can follow me on Twitter at RotoDoc, and thanks for tuning in.